All right. So I don't know about you guys, but we get asked a lot of questions from, even if it's through social media or customers when they're coming in and having a sit down. And one of the most common questions is, what's better, house or a unit? And
100%.
that is the debate, the great, great debate.
It
And I
is.
thought it'd be awesome for us to chat about it because
Yeah, I'd love
it's
to.
the hottest topic all the
It
time.
is. I agree. Well, because units have their place,
Yeah.
And if I've got a client that's already got three house and land, a unit gives better yield. It's much less maintenance, So there's a place for units. But I think also we said it earlier. If you can buy a house and land in New Farm or Tenerife, great. But if not, a unit is an option that is more affordable and gets you into that location. And I would say location is key, although this is not my jam. This is where I've got to pass over to Ida. But we get asked this a lot, and that's where I think working in with you, Ida, and being able to put the client across to you to talk about this, because this is something that comes up a lot, especially with the grandchildren, kids in their 20s.
We're definitely seeing a real trend in lending lately of, the younger clients moving to units,
and
even to raise families, not just as investment.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we need to look at when we're talking about the house versus unit is that, we're actually just looking at supply versus demand.
Yeah.
And an investment is just purely based on where is the best place to put your money in for the highest return.
Yeah.
If you take away all of the rest, that's it.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for the highest return, capital growth always starts off from the cities, and then it moves out. So like you said, if you could buy a house at New Farm, then you would buy a house at New Farm. But a lot of people can't afford a house at New Farm. So buying a piece of that, being in an area which is in higher demand and lower supply, because for anyone to come and build another block of apartments, they have to be able to buy that much land and then go up. So every time a developer is doing that, generally the price of the apartments are going up based on the initial land purchase. So it's always about supply and demand. You can get, how many examples do you have of clients that have bought land that haven't made any money?
And it's sometimes it's very difficult to actually talk to a client about that, because they would almost prefer to buy a block of land out, sort of, I don't know, as far west as, maybe 40 kilometres from the city.
Yep.
Some of the new estates like Ripley and places like that are selling a lot of house and land. And I know they've done quite well I know everything's done well.
Yeah.
I don't think you could have bought anything 2 years ago or 3 years ago that hasn't done well. But I think long term, the closer you get to facilities, amenities, walkability, the easier it is to walk to things, lifestyle. I had the wonderful experience of actually living in a unit for the first time 2 years ago. We were building, and it was through COVID, and the build ran late. So we had to live in the valley with 4 kids.
Yep.
We lived in a unit in the valley because the kids went to school in the city. And we were there for 8 weeks, and I loved every minute of it. I think we exercised more. We were out and about more. Everything was convenient. It was almost like being on a holiday.
Yeah.
And there was nothing about it that I didn't love. And I can absolutely see why unit living is so large in countries, Singapore and New York, London.
That just comes down to land supply.
Yeah, 100%.
So when you were talking about out 40Ks or Ripley, all these, the reasons why land doesn't always make you money, it can also be because there is an oversupply in that area, right? And for that area to go up in value, you need to be able to reduce the supply, which means how much land supply in those new areas is there before the value goes up.
That's
so
right.
Someone needs to be buying your property secondhand for that value to increase. If they can go out and buy a brand new one for the same price that you built yours for 4 years ago, why would they buy yours?
Yeah, 100%.
So that's the supply. But the other factor is also looking at the demographics and the income of those areas. So if you're buying in an area where the household income is lower, right? Or how much percentage is the household income? This is probably more with you, Brendan. The percentage of income that they're spending on rent, the percentage of income that they're spending on mortgage, if that percentage is really high, how much more rent can they pay? How much more can they borrow, or how much more can the prices increase for anyone in the area to be able to buy? Right. And that's why these areas that are closer to the CBDs still continue to outperform. For example, in Newstead, I can use plenty of client examples that have purchased units off the plan, all the way back 10 years, each year, even 2 years ago, but let's go back further, 15 years ago, that have made money year on year and year. And that's because of the area. So I would be really careful in saying, units don't make money. Now, if I told any of you, if you could have bought a 2-bedroom unit in Bondi for $900,000, even 5 years ago, you still could have bought a 2-bed, 1-bath, or 10 years ago, 3-bedroom. Would you have bought that in Bondi or bought a house?
Absolutely.
In the Western Corridor.
Well, not even in a house 10 k's from Brisbane CBD or further. You're always going to look at supply versus demand and the demographics of the area, because there's a couple of things at play, right? If you're buying a property, and you mentioned this just before, you buy a property, you might have made money 2 years because everyone did after COVID. Yeah. The boom happened in Queensland, right? Or everywhere really in Australia. But what happens after that? Are you ever going to make more money in the next 10 years? Now, what we want to look at is rent growth and property growth, because when we talk about negative gearing later, which is another topic, negative gearing on a property should not be negative geared forever if you're buying in the right areas. After 5 years in blue chip prestige, like more blue chip areas, that property should be neutral or positive. It's only negative geared because of the price versus the rent at the time hasn't caught up, right?
And I think the other thing driving those rents is supply and demand, as you say, and it's the desire, like the lifestyle desirability of those areas, the amount of infrastructure, the amount of development we're seeing, for day and night lifestyle in some of these areas is the most I've seen over my lifetime in Brisbane. So certainly the desirability from a lifestyle and an employment point of view.
100%.
And then it means those rents keep increasing and providing a yield that you won't see in other properties that are necessarily further out.
Yeah, and talking about that, which is what we're thinking about lifestyle, we have to think about how people live in property. Like the actual stats are that the average household is now 2.6. So why do you need a 5-bedroom house? The most thing in demand is people that are looking at 2.6 per household. Yeah. So that is another driver. Like, you can't be an investor and just look at one thing because I want to live in a house. So everyone, as a baby boomer, I used to live in a 5-bedroom house with a yard. That's not how these young people won't even leave the couch soon. They'll be all in virtually in another space. So why do they even need a bedroom? They'll just sit in a chair.
I think society sort of pushes you that way. That's why when I lived in the valley with the 4 kids, it was like I hadn't thought outside the box. I've always lived in a house because, and I hate mowing the lawn on a Saturday. The maintenance that comes with the house. But just speaking briefly back on portfolios and lending in rents and cash flow, I think one of the things that investors who aren't mature or who aren't sophisticated, so it might be their first investment property, they don't sometimes have a handle on how much a house can actually cost as well. Yes. The rent's always lower. You get much higher rent when you're in that inner city. And I'm not talking about units sort of out in, the outer suburbs, because everybody knows someone that bought a unit out, somewhere Nunda or somewhere sort of out in the outer suburbs that hasn't had anywhere near the growth, that it should have.
Yet.
So I'm talking,
actually,
okay, that's true. Actually, units
Nunda has actually grown a lot.
Yeah, actually, no, Nunda's pretty good.
Go further, 25, 30
That's
Ks.
true. And Nunda's on a train, on a train
Yeah.
line, which I'm huge on actually.
Yeah.
Trains trains anywhere really. Sydney probably. I don't know much about.
So that's transport orientated development, which is built around train lines.
Yeah, train lines are huge. I think anywhere if you but I think with if you take into account the tax appreciation that you get, but also the cash flow that it costs to hold that property for the year, you've got to look at that on top of your growth as well, which not everybody does. They see this growth that people are getting at the moment, and they're saying my unit hasn't got that. But if you look at the figures, the unit's actually starting to get growth now. They're always about 2. Am I right? Do you think I'd about 2 years behind generally units, or am I sort of making that up?
I wouldn't say there's a difference between unit and house price growth. I would say suburbs and also cities grow at different ranges. So you might have some sort of infrastructure that hasn't hit or is about to hit an area. So remember the ICB before it was built, Albion, all those areas got reconnected to the other side in how fast, and that made prices boom in those areas. certain things can
There's
have
certain
different
events,
factors,
yeah.
but it's also the timing of when you buy.
Yeah.
Like if you just bought in the property cycle and you just bought just before the boom, you might want to hold that property for 10 years to see whether it has performed, but people are getting more and more impatient with their portfolio.
Yes, I
Young
agree.
people are super impatient, but generally, because I call it the social age, because we're so on our phones and we're getting so much information
Data
so
feeds.
fast, so
FOMO.
easy, we're
Yeah.
forgetting that investments, not just property, shares, crypto, all of the different types of investments you can do. You got to be patient.
do.
If you make money quickly, bonus.
Yes, yeah.
But don't have the expectations.
No, it's boring. Investing is boring.
Yeah.
It really is buy and hold. Like sometimes I feel like
A delayed gratification
Yes.
it's for
But
the
how much do people spend on dinner and wine?
just cut out one.
Like how much do
tiny
people
luxury.
easily spend on things that make no return, but they'll complain about little bits and pieces that they have to pay for something that has a potential huge return.
It's true.
I know we get a lot of investors balking at like the body corporate or strata fees or concerned about
For
those. But
units,
if you actually
yes,
look back
yeah.
in and what's there, but it's often a small price compared
Tax
to the yield
deductible
that's
as well.
there and it's tax deductible. Coming back to the societal that you were both referring to as well, that's been really interesting to see that, as
The
someone
societal
who
trends.
the societal trends, having grown up in Brisbane and having lived abroad for a number of years and returned to Brisbane at a later stage, seeing how many cities, as you say, you referred to Singapore, and there's nearly every capital city around the world through supply and demand, families, multiple generations of families
Live in
have been
units.
raised in units and townhouses, and with all the interstate and international migration, and I think coupled with the fact that if you look at the stock, like on Grow Properties list, the actual way units are now designed and built and developed has changed
lifestyle.
dramatically. So they are really a livable space where so many more of our clients are saying, this is a great place to raise a family.
You're forced to go out too.
Yeah.
I find when you live in a unit, you're forced to get to a local park and you go out a lot more. You
There's
go to
a
dinner a lot
community
more.
aspect and a
You
social
get to know your
aspect.
neighbours
Yeah.
and very much a social aspect.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And the buildings all have facilities now, the ones that we're looking at, which are designed, if you could build your dream home, what would that have? It would have a wine cellar, a private
That's
dining
right.
room. It would have like a whiskey room, maybe. It would have a working space. It would have a huge,
A
beautiful
pool you don't
community.
clean.
Pools.
That's right. That's actually a good
Pools,
point.
saunas,
Yeah.
spas. These facilities are available in these apartments. So people are actually preferring to live in these places because they would never be able to have all those facilities.
And a green
then-
space you don't mow. The list
Correct.
goes on and on. That's
and
right.
you meet, you like you said,
And
you
you're
meet people,
connected,
you
yeah.
feel more inclusive,
Yeah, connected
right?
to-
More connected.
Yeah.
But going back on body corporate fees, a house has costs.
They do.
Yes.
And people forget that.
They
So
do.
the body corporate fees are actually costs that are associated with a sinking fund, which is to put
right.
money away for maintenance, right? And then you've got the admin costs of running the building. But the sinking fund is to be used to maintain the building. And in the buildings that we look at, like you could look at some of the buildings and we could go for a walk and I'd say that's 10 years and you'd be like, it looks amazing. And that is because the buildings are maintained. If you own a house and your roof needs to be fixed, you've got leaks, your hot water system goes, you need to be maintaining investment property. This is key. And we'll talk about it when we go to property management. People think they can own an investment property and never do a thing to it, but still continue to increase.
That's right.
House is even more maintenance, but
It
you'll
is.
have a massive bill at once unless you're putting money away. So realistically, it should be the same amount of money you would be putting away for a house or an apartment in that type of price
You need to
point.
be managing your own sinking fund effectively with a house.
Exactly, but
That's
people
right.
don't.
No, that's right.
And they don't realize that because they haven't been paying it every year. But I really prefer to have the body corporate manage the maintenance and make sure the building's looked after. So I think people would just sort of need a bit more education. And this is the whole purpose of doing
Agreed,
this.
yes, yeah.
To educate people to understand all of those facets. And, so going back on the main point, it's not house versus unit.
No.
It's what is the best place you can put your money in.
Yeah.
And hey, guys,
And
if you
what's
can buy the
your-
house in New Farm.
Yeah, and I think also what's your situation? So what's
Yeah.
your cash flow like? If it's quite tight, then the units are going to be that, and if you're borrowing capacities, it depends on your borrowing capacity.
Absolutely.
It depends on cash flow. It
Yeah.
depends on so many areas. I think we all agree that land appreciates. Like
Yeah.
that, I mean, that's universal. But if you can afford to buy the land in the right location,
Yeah.
That's the question, really.
Yeah, look, you know, at the end of the day, it's for me, I like having both in my portfolio, and I've always, you know, played around with the houses, and I've had apartments. I don't think one is better than the other. I think it always comes down to affordability. Nice. Like you said, affordability, cash flow, location.
Yep.
And if you can afford to buy the properties in the better locations with land, 100% that is the best thing that we could possibly do. Yeah. But apartments will also perform. So I think it's always going to come down to the individual, and that's why we're all here. You guys will be sitting down with the clients. Brendan, you're going to do the borrowing power and decide exactly how much they can borrow, and then they can go through with the plan, and you guys can advise them on what's better.
Cash
we
flow.
can provide anything that clients want, whether it's a house, apartment, townhouse, anything that they need. We've got access to that across Australia.
And even just a bit of guidance. Like even if they just want to talk to you and just feel comfortable and get their confidence up, because sometimes it's taking that first step and being able to trust somebody and to hand them on to you. You know, they might just want to build their trust up. So it's going to be really exciting, I think, for a lot of our younger clients coming through who'll get to know you and your company and what you offer.
And between us all, they're then able to make that informed choice with which
100%.
one is going to be best for their circumstances. Whether it's a unit or a house will come down to individual considerations for, you know, for that particular
house
client.
and land, if your cash flow allows it. Yeah, 100%. But units have a place as well. Even if you can continue, if you had 3 house and land, I would still probably look at a unit purely because of the yield and the tax deductions. So there's certain areas where if I'm doing a plan up, it doesn't always just involve. It will involve certain asset classes purely based on cash flows.
And I think it's also like where you are in your life cycle, right? And if you are getting close to downsizing, you're probably looking at downsizing into a townhouse, villa, or potentially an apartment. I know I've spoken to some of your clients recently that are looking, they've got these big, beautiful acreages that are looking at downsizing.
Yeah. And some of them they'll buy the investment property now, you know, 5 years out, planning to move into it when they retire. Especially we've actually had a lot of Southerners doing that. They're buying, we've got a lot of Melbourne clients, and so they're buying their property, their townhouse or their unit, or a lot of them are loving South Bank at the moment.
South Bank's
back, and they're buying units there, knowing that they're renting it out at the moment, knowing that that's where they want to be, you know, in 5 to 10 years. So property's got, you know, some amazing different plans that you can do with property. And Brendan, with your borrowing capacities that you do up for people, it just means that we're working in with maximum leverage. And I know there's risk
run multiple
profiles.
scenarios and consider them and compare them.
And I know on the risk scale, I'm like, you know, I'm up here on the risk scale. I'm at top off the charts with risk. But, you know, the more the banks will give you to leverage, myself personally, the more the banks will give you to leverage, the more you're in the market. And so that's where I feel you work in so well with my team.
Yeah, it's an important element. Absolutely.
It's a huge element. And like Ida said, the cash flow is one of the biggest drivers, I think, of what sort of property that you're able to purchase.
You ultimately end up proceeding with,
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be heaps of questions flowing in and maybe other people debating on this topic.
But we welcome all the questions.
Yeah. Love them.
So people can book in and or just phone or contact us by email to drop in any questions that they have.
Yeah.